I promised you an interesting insight about the negotiations. Let's start with what happened and how it happened. First of all, here's where we'll begin. Oleksii Honcharenko, a member of the Ukrainian parliament, writes the following, an interesting insight from the negotiations in Geneva. There was a noticeable difference in the positions of Budanov and Arakhamia, who were more inclined toward dialogue. On the other hand, Umerov and Kyslytsya were more focused on following Zelensky's directives. And as we know, these directives are distinguished by their particular strength and resilience, writes Oleksii Honcharenko. And right away, another insight emerges here, but this one comes from foreign journalists, whom I also listened to hear what they had to say. It has been widely reported that David Arakhamia and Kirill Budanov allegedly held a private meeting with Vladimir Medinsky, well after the conclusion of the official diplomatic negotiations. What were they doing? A meeting at the Intercontinental. It's a big fancy hotel. And of course, a number of journalists who were following the process were also staying at this hotel. And what do they say? They say that after the official part of the negotiations ended, the delegations left. After some time, Medinsky arrived at this Intercontinental, already without his official suit, without a tie, so to speak, and he held, spending quite a bit of time, staying for several long hours in this hotel. Then he himself confirmed that he had spoken with the Ukrainian delegation off the record. Then, what happened next? Peskov also confirmed that the closed negotiations between Russia and Ukraine in Switzerland, the content of these talks is not being disclosed. Peskov referred to the head of the Russian delegation, Medinsky, who had previously stated that the negotiations were held in various formats. So we can assume, as they say, that at least part of the negotiations took place without any omissions. But what does he say about these negotiations? Medinsky himself, the negotiations were difficult but businesslike. So with all that said, many observers have suggested that very little meaningful progress should be expected from these negotiations, because for now, the situation regarding Russia's plans remains unchanged. The Russians are not going to abandon their plans. In Donetsk region, in Luhansk region, and in general, as I understand it, across all of Ukraine. By the way, information has appeared from the commander of the National Guard, Pivnenko. He says that Ukraine will be able to fight for several more years, 100%, and will not give up any territory to the Russian Federation. That's if we're talking about certain concessions. Peskov also said that determining the next meeting place regarding Ukraine will depend on the analysis of what happened in Geneva. Well, and the heads of European agencies and intelligence services doubt that the United States will be able to reach a peace agreement as early as 2026. This is reported by Reuters. The heads of 5 European intelligence agencies told Reuters that Russia is not inclined to end the war quickly, and in their assessment, its strategic goals in Ukraine have not changed. The publication's sources have further pointed out that Moscow is actively utilizing diplomatic negotiations with the United States to seek substantial sanctions relief and new economic agreements. While no significant breakthroughs were officially announced at the recent high-level talks in Geneva, despite Donald Trump's optimistic statements that a final deal is already within very close reach. If we talk about the results of those negotiations, based on what we can say and state, it is what Zelensky said and summarized. Namely, that supposedly the military have reached an agreement that is on issues of monitoring and how everything might take place, but the political track still remains in a kind of suspended state for us, unfortunately. And here the situation is clear. Friedrich Merz stated that the Russian authorities cannot exist without war and negotiations with Vladimir Putin will not lead to peace. Friedrich Merz, for those who don't know, is the Chancellor of Germany. And here it should be added that it's very strange that Europeans in general are not involved in the negotiation process at all, since it is Europe that the United States wants to assign the issues of monitoring, assistance, arms purchases, and so on. What does Merz say? Russia is literally stuck in a very deep barbarism. Friedrich Merz stated that the Russian authorities cannot exist without war, and negotiations with Putin will not lead to peace. According to him, the Kremlin needs to maintain its war machine because it has no plan for what to do with the hundreds of thousands of soldiers after the front. Neither reason nor humanitarian arguments will convince Putin, said the German chancellor. He also stated that normalizing relations with Moscow in the near future is practically impossible. And he called what is happening in Russia systemic terror. Well, what else? In fact, we cannot disagree because what Russia is doing is indeed systemic terror against our country and yours. And in the near future, Friedrich Merz is expected to visit Kiev. This was also announced. Member of the Ukrainian parliament, Oleksii Honcharenko. Let's see what Friedrich Merz will bring us. Well, and meanwhile, the United States is demanding that NATO allies reduce foreign missions and not invite Ukraine or other partners to the Alliance Summit, which will take place in Ankara. This change in approach reflects the White House's desire under Donald Trump to view NATO as a purely Euro-Atlantic defense project, abandoning decades of expansion toward global partnerships and initiatives. So these details emerged after Deputy Secretary of Defense Elbridge Colby recently shared the Trump administration's views on what he called NATO 3.0. The US under Donald Trump is pressuring NATO to scale back many of its overseas missions, including ending the alliance's key mission in Iraq, and the reduction of the NATO peacekeeping operation in Kosovo, and so on. For those interested, you can read this and And here it immediately becomes clear what Donald Trump, the Trump administration, and in general, the United States' current stance is regarding positions on Ukraine and NATO. Meanwhile, Israel has declared the highest level of readiness due to a possible strike on Iran. All services have been ordered to be ready for war with Iran. It is expected that if the United States strikes this country, Israel will join the operation. And the fact that the US is considering striking Iran, we are aware of this. There is confirmation of this in the following report. This message is from Polish Prime Minister Tusk. What is this about? All Poles in Iran must leave the country immediately. In just a few hours, the possibility of evacuation will disappear, reports Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. Senator Lindsey Graham also made the following statement about Iran. The plans are already in place. The decision has been made. All these ships are not coming here just because it's a nice time of year here. In this context, Lindsey Graham is referring to United States ships, including aircraft carriers and all the rest, which have already been sent to the shores of Iran. So the main question that is worrying many people right now is whether a new war will begin. But this time it would be a war between the United States of America and Iran. We have been watching Iran for a long time, and together we have seen, heard, and know about the protests there, how bloody and brutal those protests have been. They were happening there. The Ayatollah's regime tried to suppress these protests. They killed protesters. Many of them simply disappeared without a trace, and that also needs to be mentioned. And here, too, there are things to hold the United States accountable for. Many people say that in fact, the United States let the protesters down because Trump promised that help would come very soon, but did nothing. And many of those who took to the streets in protest were actually killed. And human rights activists reported information that many protesters were detained, killed, and then everything was staged to make it look as if they had been killed during the protests. But in reality, this was direct. There were clear instructions from the authorities. Moreover, they even said that they would execute the protesters. I can't either deny or confirm what happened next because the internet was cut off there and there is very little information. But now we are waiting for the next few days. Everything should be resolved. Meanwhile, there is a new development in the Epstein case. Not only was a Ukrainian woman found in this case, but Andrew, who is a prince of Great Britain, also paid the price for his connections with Epstein. And the current King of Great Britain, Charles, has already commented on this. What does he say? The law must have its say. King Charles III of Great Britain commented on the arrest of his younger brother Andrew. With deep concern, I learned the news about Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and the suspicions of abuse of power. Now, a full and fair due process must take place, during which this matter will be investigated properly and by the appropriate authorities. In this, as I have said before, they have our full and sincere support and cooperation. Let me make it clear, the law must have its say. While this process is ongoing, it would be inappropriate for me to comment further on this case. In the meantime, my family and I continue to fulfill our duties and serve all of you, he stated. King Charles III of the United Kingdom. Why did this statement arise? Because in Norfolk, the younger brother of King Charles III of Great Britain, former Prince Andrew, was detained on suspicion of involvement in Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. Several foreign publications reported this at once, including The Guardian and the BBC, as well as regarding the Epstein case. Indeed, it caused a lot of commotion abroad. Here is this photo. This is Andrew and Epstein, by the way. And what are they talking about? So, after it became known about Andrew's connections with the American financier convicted of sexual crimes and human trafficking, he was stripped of his title. The police suspect Andrew Mountbatten Windsor of sharing confidential information with Epstein when he was a trade envoy, an envoy of Great Britain. In return, Epstein could have sent a woman to Britain for sexual contact with Andrew. Charles III himself, after his brother's arrest, expressed his willingness to cooperate with the police.